y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to tell you about 5 things I wish I'd known before I thru-hiked the Arizona Trail. First, I want to tell you my 5 things, but I also polled some fellow AZT hikers to find out some stuff they were surprised about once they got out on the AZT, so I will share that later too. The first thing I wish I'd known is rabies is actually kind of common amongst the wildlife like foxes and skunks. I don't recall ever seeing any rabies warning signs during any of my previous thru-hikes. I don't remember talking to any fellow thru-hikers of other trails and hearing them mention any kind of encounters with rabid wild animals or rabid animals of any kind. So it was quite a surprise to me when I got out on the AZT and I did see some signs that mentioned rabid animals. Well, a lot of times you see warning signs, and while you kind of tuck it in the back of your mind and like, okay, I'll store this information if I need it later, but like probably not gonna. And then I met a thru-hiker who told me and showed me a video of her encounter with a rabid fox. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it looked, you know, like a crazy experience, but I didn't realize how truly terrifying that could be until I had my own experience with a rabid skunk in my tent at 4 a.m. while I was pumping breast milk. And I also saw in the comments of Far Out somebody else who had an encounter with a rabid wild animal in their tent in the middle of the night, and he ended up commenting on another video when I had mentioned his experience. And so anyway, it was just like there was so much to do with rabies this year on the trail. And in the emergency room, when I went and got my rabies shots, I talked to some of the folks there that confirmed that rabies is pretty common in wild animals out there and just kind of in the state in general. And I just want to take a second to clear this up. The animal that attacked my tent in the middle of the night was definitely not a badger. It was 100% a skunk. I actually saw badgers later on the trail that looked completely different than the skunk. Their booties are a lot more bootylicious, but the skunk that attacked me, or attacked my tent, also smelled like a skunk. Like, it never sprayed me, but I could smell the skunk scent. So it is beyond a shadow of a doubt a skunk that was attacking my tent. And the other folks that were camped in the area also saw it and confirmed that it was a skunk. So anyway, it's not a badger, it's a skunk. I don't know how much I would have done differently if I had known this ahead of time. I can tell you going forward now, if I know I'm going to be hiking in an area where there's like a rabies warning, I'm carrying bear spray to, you know, spray any kind of animal that I might encounter that, you know, seems rabid. So I don't know. I can't say for sure that I would have had I known this ahead of time, but I certainly will now. Next, I wish I'd known more about water sources. Now, I'm going to kind of cheat here and throw 3 different things under the umbrella of knowing more about water sources. So first, I wish I'd known how truly scuzzy or poor quality some of the water sources were actually going to be. I had some pretty bad water sources on the PCT. There was one that there was actually a dead animal in a cistern, but it was like the only water for a long stretch, so we were forced to drink it. I did boil it and then filter it, but even on the CDT, I drank from cow ponds, you know, where you've got an earthen pond and cows can walk right in there and doo-doo while you're scooping up your water. So I'm not a stranger to that idea. So when I knew there would be cow ponds on the AZT, I was like, yeah, I've been there, done that. But these are a whole different ballgame of gross. There are some that are just so murky green. There are some that are really cloudy like chocolate milk. Even after it sits all night still, it's just very turbid water. But had I known this, I could have maybe prepared a little bit better. I certainly would have focused more on some form of pre-filtration. I would recommend at least having a bandana, but even that, pouring into a smart water bottle with another smart water bottle, it just seems like it's gonna take a lot. But you gotta be prepared to pre-filter in some way, shape, or form, and also to have clean water to back flush your filter as you're filtering, because it's going to clog up very quickly. On some of these sources, you can't even get an entire liter through your filter before you need to back flush it. So make sure you already have some clean water on hand when you go to filter some of this really gross water. And also, I would carry a filter and some sort of chemical treatment like Aquamira If you're in a pinch, you can get bleach, but having some sort of chemical treatment to back up the mechanical or physical treatment is not a bad idea. In that same vein, I just wonder with water like this that's super turbid, if there's some sort of flocculant that's drinkable, sprinkleable, that is lightweight, that you could put in your water bottle that would make it settle to the bottom, all the sediment, and then it would be easy to pre-filter before you run it through your sawyer. I'm just saying. Well, apparently something like that does exist, so I did not know that, but knowing that going forward would be fantastic if I knew I was going to encounter just really gross water sources like this that would clog my filter. Finally, about the water sources, on Far Out, the app that I use to navigate the Arizona Trail, I noticed that there were water sources referenced as tanks. At the beginning, I thought that that meant there was going to be some sort of metal tank, like a rain cistern, or just some sort of collection or big, large container for the water, even a cattle trough. But no, tanks on the Arizona Trail are ponds. Earth and cow ponds are called tanks. So if you're like me, you could end up potentially passing up a cow pond looking for an actual, metal tank. Next, I wish I'd known how truly brutal the teddy bear cactus could be. To be fair, folks in the comments warned me, but until you experience something yourself, sometimes you don't really know how bad it can be. So the teddy bear cactus, also known as jumping cholla, is a cactus that breaks off very easily in segments. Now, I've had potted plants like cactus. I've had cactus in the yard before. I've been stuck by cactus. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. So when people were warning me about this cactus, I was like, yeah, I might live in Alabama, but I've dealt with cactus before. It's uncomfortable. No, this stuff is on a different level. Because it breaks off in those segments, you'll find pieces quite frequently on the trail in the path. And I thought, well, I've got shoes on, no big deal. Well, one of these things stuck into my shoe and kicked up onto my calf, and this happened a couple of times, but the barbs on this thing are gnarly to pull out. It's taking a chunk of flesh with it when you rip it out. But also I had a piece poke through my shoe. Now, it really wasn't that big of a deal for me. It was just a little piece, and it was uncomfortable for a minute, but didn't cause any serious issues. But I told y'all I polled other AZT hikers on their experiences and what they were surprised about on trail. And one hiker said that he ended up having to have minor surgery. He had to get off trail because this piece of cactus had stuck through his shoe and into his foot and was causing him such problems that he couldn't walk on it. And then he ended up having to have minor surgery to have the rest extracted a while later. And then it still took more time to heal. So just be careful. Don't think that you can step on this stuff and keep moving. If you see it, actively try to avoid it because it does not feel good. And even if you have boots on, if it can stick in the bottom of the sole, even if it might not go through it, if you're like me and your feet kind of brush your legs as you walk, it can stick in your leg. It really does not feel good. Next, I was quite surprised at how unpredictable the weather can be. Now, I understand in the desert, folks know, you'll have extreme temperatures, but oftentimes when I've hiked in the desert, like in New Mexico and even on the PCT through California, in those areas, for the most part, the weather started off cool and kind of gradually and consistently got warmer as time went on. Obviously, you'll have some little, cold snaps again and it'll start warming up. But on the Arizona Trail, wildly, it changed throughout most of my hike. Even the section where I got norovirus, I went through the lowest point on the trail, and it was late in the season compared to other hikers. I got rained on, and I was cold. I was shivering in the cold rain in that section, and a lot of folks think that when I went to the ER to get fluids, that it was because it was a heat-related thing. But I was cold in that stretch before going to the ER to get fluids, and I just went because I got norovirus and was throwing up and wanted to make sure I was proactive about maintaining my breast milk supply, so I wanted to get that extra hydration. But even the night before I finished, in the beginning of July, I got rained on, and it was pretty chilly that evening while I was getting rained on. So the temperature fluctuation just was different to me than what I remember from other trails. Also, I did not expect to get so much rain in the desert. It just seemed like there were more days that I got rain than what I was expecting on the Arizona Trail, especially because of what a dry year it had been. So all I will say is just be prepared for temperatures to fluctuate the whole time and for rain to come and go. And I mean, you should be prepared for those things anyway, but just want to reiterate that. And finally, I wish I had known how difficult the southern half to 2/3 of the AZT actually is. I kept saying that I wanted to go no-bow on the AZT so that I had time to build up my trail legs for the climb out of the Grand Canyon. But I didn't realize that some of the climbs down south are actually pretty brutal. The first day is straight up to 9,000 feet, which is almost the highest point on the trail. And there are just several other really long and difficult climbs. I am glad that I had as good of trail legs by the canyon as I could have, but I thought that the climbs in the south would be a little bit more mild than they actually were. It wasn't necessarily always that the ascent was just super steep, but even that the climbs were rocky, or the trail in general was just pretty aggressive tread. So in like all of the ways, the southern half to 2/3 of the AZT is just a pretty rugged trail. So I know some people will probably think, well, if you had done more research, then maybe you wouldn't have been surprised by these things. But historically, as I've done through hikes before, despite the amount of research I've done, I have still been surprised by something out on the trail. I mean, that's just the way it is. You can do all the reading in the world and hearing other people's accounts of their experiences, but until you get out there and have your own experience, you can't quite understand how something actually is. But I do enjoy making videos like this to try to help other folks not learn things the hard way. So hopefully it will be helpful to somebody. So like I mentioned, I polled some of my fellow AZT hikers and asked them things that they wish they had known before they started their hikes. And a few of them mentioned some of the same things that I already have, but there were some additional comments that I wanted to include because I think that they might be helpful to other people. First, somebody commented that they felt like there was a lot more water out on the AZT than what fearmongers had led them to believe. And I would have to agree with this because I was surprised that at an average of every 10 miles or so, there was some kind of water source. Now, the quality, as I mentioned before, is not always the greatest, and a water source on the AZT might consist of like a very stagnant, buggy green puddle on the ground. But there was something that could be collected and used, and if treated properly, drank. Next, a lot of people were surprised, and myself included, at the different environmental changes and microclimates. It seemed like with every bend or ascent or descent, the views were changing, the fauna and flora, and that was something that I really enjoyed about the AZT. And finally, some people commented that they were surprised at how the higher elevations on the AZT affected them, like even at around 7,000 feet. And I think a lot of this might be trickery of the brain, you know, what you see with your eyes and what you expect your experience to be. So out on like the Pacific Crest Trail in the Sierra Nevada, or on the Colorado Trail and Continental Divide Trail in the Rocky Mountains, you see these massive mountains and you're up at these really high elevations. So, you know, you expect to feel the effects of the change in elevation. And those trails are up at, you know, sometimes 14,000 feet. But on the Arizona Trail, the highest point is around 9,000 feet. But a lot of times you're climbing up to over 6,000 and 7,000 feet. And at about 6,500 feet is where you can start to really feel the effects of altitude sickness, if that happens to hit you. So, you know, even though everything looks like, okay, I'm in the desert, there are mountains, but it just doesn't look like an area where altitude sickness would hit you. So, you know, maybe that's why it kind of took some people by surprise. But just be aware of that, know the symptoms of it, and, you know, get down as quickly as possible if you do feel yourself having negative effects, you know, being up at 7,000 feet or higher. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today on things that took me by surprise out on the Arizona Trail and that I wish I had known before I got out there and hiked it. If any of y'all have hiked the Arizona Trail, even if that's section hiking, weekend trips, through hikes, whatever, and there were some things that were surprising to you. I'd love to hear about that in the comments below, and I think that it could be helpful to other folks. So anyway, thank y'all so much for watching, and we will see y'all next time.